Well, with running back values trending up and a lot of wide receiver values going down in fantasy drafts, there's some extremely undervalued fantasy starters at the wide receiver position with major upside that you can draft in the later rounds. This can be the key to winning in your fantasy leagues in 2025. And Dave, you and I are doing the same thing we did last week, where we took a look at some undervalued running backs. This week, we're taking a look at some undervalued wide receivers that we feel not enough people are talking about, and that's what is suppressing their average draft position, which is great. There might be some hype in the preseason, but right now, these guys are all great values.
Yeah, and I'm going to start off talking about some guys that might be a little bit obvious, guys we've talked about on the show before, and then I'm going to get like sicko mode towards the end of the show and talk about some really, really deep cuts. But yeah, I think this is a weird offseason where we are seeing people start to lean back on running backs a little bit. And Jeff Bell and I, we just talked on the Dynasty show yesterday about how now we're seeing this kind of change in how NFL teams operate, where it seems like, you look 5 years ago, every single team was running a running back committee, and now you have a handful of workhorses in the NFL. And, people want to go out and reach for those guys aggressively in dynasty drafts, which is opening up this nice pocket where wide receivers are great values. And, we're obviously not talking about the super early round guys. I think ADP through the first few rounds is pretty sharp this year, but there is this like pocket in rounds 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, where I just think there are so many great wide receivers to target. We're going to talk about a bunch of those guys today, but it just seems like there's this honeypot in those middle rounds where you can just get these wide receivers that all have sky high ceilings. So I'm excited to be doing the show today.
Yeah, man, we're not even talking about anyone in the first 5 rounds. None of these wide receivers are actually being drafted as top 30 wide receivers. So everyone on today's show is outside of the top 30. And Dave, we started this as wide receivers nobody is talking about. And then, of course, the Miami Dolphins decided to make a move. And now there's a lot of people talking about this player, but I think this is still the right time to talk about Jaylen Waddle, wide receiver for the Miami Dolphins.
Yeah, and I've been a big Waddle fan since before he was drafted. Just checks a lot of the boxes that I like for a prospect. And a lot of the talking points I'm going to have about Waddle this offseason are going to be similar to the talking points I had about Waddle last offseason. This guy is a rookie. We saw him in this high volume, low efficiency role, just kind of catching these short little passes across the middle of the field, making plays after the catch. Then Tyreek Hill shows up. Volume goes down a little bit, but his efficiency skyrocketed. We've seen as a rookie, 24.8% target share is great. That was inside the top 20. In 2023, target rate 27.5. That was top 10. As far as the efficiency in 2022, 2.81 yards per route run. And that year, he also led the league in yards per target, led the league in yards per reception. Followed that up in 2023 with 2.68 yards per route run, another elite clip there. But it's been injuries. And I feel like if you look at it, I was actually kind of shocked to see that he's only missed 7 games over the last 2 seasons. But I don't think that really tells the full story, because 9 games that he has played, he has been held below a 70% snap share. 3 of those games have been below a 50% snap share. There's a lot of these games where he's technically out there. And if you're just looking at games played, it doesn't really convey how often he is hurt. He's in and out of the blue tent a lot, and that could be frustrating. But now with Jonnu Smith out of the picture, I think we see him be this focal point of the offense again. It's no surprise that Tyreek Hill lost a step last year. He wasn't hitting the same mile per hour data that we've seen in previous years. Jonnu Smith, who ate up a bunch of those short targets, is now gone. And to me, I just see a sky high ceiling here for Jaylen Waddle, a guy who can earn a lot of targets, a guy who is efficient with the targets that come his way. And really, it's been health has been the only thing that's kept him from being a wide receiver one. So with him right now getting drafted in round 6, he's just like an auto pick for me. It doesn't matter how I start my drafts, whether I'm going wide receiver heavy, running back heavy, whether I've got a quarterback or a wide receiver. Jaylen Waddle in round 6, you can fit into just about any build this year.
Yeah, and I think that out of all that we have 3 players in this show that we're talking about that are all being drafted in round 6, 3 wide receivers, and I think he has the highest upside.
Yeah.
And I love what you said there, that he's basically an auto draft, because at that time you're probably getting him as your wide receiver 3 on your build, depending on how you've started your team. And that's why we mentioned running back values are going up, wide receiver values are dropping a bit, and a lot of it is just we tend to do this, man. We overreact to what happened the season before without the context. So much of that Dolphins team was without Tua. So much of it was running through Jonnu Smith, who's no longer there. Like, there's a lot to look at here. And by the way, let's just hit on this. Darren Waller goes to the Miami Dolphins now in a weird 7th-round trade. It's a 1-year, $5 million deal.
Conditional 6th and a conditional 7th. That's what
Sure.
we're swapping here.
Conditionally, it means nothing. Like, I'm just going to be real here. I'm a Miami Dolphins fan. I'm born and raised in South Florida. I don't see this as some sort of big needle mover, especially when it comes to Jaylen Waddle, even Tyreek Hill. To like, I'm slowly but surely starting to change my stance on Tyreek Hill. And Dave,
Up to him. Yeah, I think the
I'm
ceiling is there
Mormon.
with where he's
I'm
getting
Mormon.
drafted in like round 3 and 4. I mean, I think the ceiling, and that's again, we were talking about the mile per hour data. I mentioned that Jeff Bell and I talked about that yesterday. He was still hitting really elite mile per hours in his first few weeks, and then he suffered that wrist injury. And I know there's jokes like, how does a wrist injury slow somebody down? But it clearly did impact his play. I mean, week 1 last year, Tyreek Hill, 80-yard touchdown, running over 20 miles an hour. I mean, that's what we expect from Tyreek Hill. And then the whole season just kind of unraveled. But like you mentioned, Darren Waller, that doesn't move the needle for me at all.
He
I
didn't
shared
move the
on
needle on
Twitter.
any of his previous teams either. Like it just
Right.
didn't happen.
I shared just on Twitter. I said I refuse to have a take about a guy coming out of retirement for a day 3 pick swap, and there was a really funny response where somebody goes, "I'm getting similar vibes," and it was Tim Tebow in a Jacksonville Jaguars jersey. Remember when he came out of retirement for a year? Yeah, that's kind of what this feels like to me.
Yeah, there's not a good look back on data sets of players that have made music videos, retired, and then come back to the league. Like there's just it's not a good data set. I'm just gonna
Le'Veon
say
Bell
that.
tried, and we saw how that worked out.
Yep. Data set. Not great. By the way, Dolphins, something I was looking at yesterday, by the way, just looking at the Dolphins, who I've been slowly but surely warming up on the whole offense because I think the defense is going to be atrocious. Devon Achane, I think he's closer to Jahmyr Gibbs than a lot of people are making him out to be, and I think he's probably a surefire first round pick at this point.
Yeah, I've got him in standard scoring. I've moved him ahead of Devon Achane, so he's my RB4. In PPR, though, it gets so tough ranking these guys. Like Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, and Devon Achane are all basically in the same tier for me.
Yeah, I mean, like that's where I have it. I posted this yesterday. I was like, I analyzed the data and I put the little Bears analytics logo that was there. Devon Achane with Tua, 22.5 PPR points. Jahmyr Gibbs with David Montgomery, 18.9 PPR points per game.
Yep.
I mean, there's just a very realistic world where the Dolphins' offensive players are actually really good. Jaylen Waddle, Devon Achane, Tyreek Hill, all these guys can be super productive.
And of course, though, with Tua is a big asterisk, and we have seen when Tua isn't
Of
in this
course.
offense, the whole thing just falls apart. And Zach Wilson now is the backup there. Like if we're without Tua and we're relying on Zach Wilson, things can get bleak again. So please,
Yeah.
if you're listening, keep Tua healthy this year. We need it.
Next guy, this is going to be the one that I'm going to talk about. And you know what? He's not super exciting. I'm not even that hyped to talk about him, but I do think that he's a value where he's going in drafts. And I want to see what ends up happening with this guy. Calvin Ridley, wide receiver for the Tennessee Titans right now. I've got him as Dave, we both actually have him as our wide receiver 31. ADP is not that far off, wide receiver 32. So it's not like we're very ahead of average draft position on this. He's a 6th round wide receiver. I just think you start to look at where he's going in drafts, even where we have him ranked, and it's more just a victim of circumstances that there are so many good wide receivers with big time upside ahead of him. But that doesn't necessarily make him a bad or not invaluable. That wouldn't be the proper terminology here, right? And not valuable, unvaluable. We're smart over here.
Invaluable means not valuable.
Really? Okay. Well, I'll Google that later. Sorry, folks, for listening. If you're
invaluable is valuable.
That's what I'm saying. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. See, I knew I'm yes. All right. Still smart. But anyways, the way I look at it here with Calvin Ridley in Tennessee, he's still going to be commanding targets here. Last year, 18th amongst wide receivers in targets, 15th in first read targets. So he was the guy that the Titans offense was running through when they had to go through the air. Thing is, they just didn't pass the ball a lot. And then you look, it was just horrible inefficiency. First in total air yards, but then 78th in actual catchable target percentage. It explains why the expected fantasy points and actual fantasy points had such a big gap. And these targets are still going to remain his. I know there's people on the roster that we're getting excited about, but the ghost of Tyler Lockett, Van Jefferson, Elic Iomanor, Chigakonkwo, none of those guys are going to be stealing the first read targets from Calvin Ridley. This is still going to be Calvin Ridley's passing offense. And now you get the upgrade with Cam Ward here. The problem last year was just on top of the efficiency being bad, there just weren't a lot of pass attempts. 31 pass attempts per game. That was in the bottom third of the league. Expected points added per dropback was 27. So when they did drop back to pass, there was just no value being added. Now we're going to have better passing, better efficiency, more passing volume, everything here with Cam Ward that you want to see with a guy like Calvin Ridley. And the defense, not really that much better. They were 30th in points against. This team is going to be trailing plenty. They're going to have to pass the ball to stay in games. And now that you've got Brian Callahan working with his number one overall draft pick, Cam Ward, I'm expecting some good value. So I wouldn't necessarily say that, Calvin Ridley is a guy that you're drafting him at wide receiver 32 and he's going to be a top 15 wide receiver. But I think what you're getting here is a guy who's going to give you a lot of good wide receiver 2 weeks, and you get to draft him as a wide receiver 3.
See, I think he could definitely finish inside the top 15. I mean, this is a guy who, the last 3 years that we've seen him play full seasons, he's eclipsed 1,000 yards. That's pretty good. He had the 1 year that he lost due to his gambling suspension, and then you had the other year where he got injured really early in the season. But this guy has basically just been a lock for 1,000 yards a season, and we have seen that rookies have this penchant where they just kind of lock on to their number one receiver. So yeah, I think some of the secondary and tertiary pieces in this offense, once you start looking at Alec Iomanor and Shamir Dike, fun dynasty stashes for sure. But if there's one guy that I want in this wide receiver room, it's Calvin Ridley. Chigga is another guy in this offense that I think is kind of a sneaky value that you can get in like the very, very end of your drafts that could kind of be the de facto slot receiver in this offense. But I think if you want to bet on one guy, Calvin Ridley clearly has the highest floor and ceiling of the bunch. And I think being a top 15, top 12 receiver isn't that crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I lean more towards, I think he's going to be a top 24 wide receiver. That's going to give you plenty of top 15 weeks. And then, then have the floor fall out on him every once in a while with that rookie quarterback. Let's do this. Let's go to our next players here. But before we do that, I want to remind everybody that you have a bunch of ways that you can enjoy this show. First is right here on YouTube. So if you're watching this video here on YouTube, take a moment to like this video, comment down below with your thoughts on these players, maybe some other guys you have questions about that you want to ask, and then make sure obviously you are subscribed to this channel, because as we get closer to the season, we are going to be picking up the pace here. We're going to be giving you 2 episodes a week, then 3 episodes a week, and we're going to make sure to give you guys plenty of pre-draft advice and hit every single topic that we can here. And then of course in season we're doing waiver wire stuff, starts and sits, trade targets, all kinds of great stuff in season here. Now Dave, I think we are going to have to put a limit on how many times we can mention this next player this offseason, because I think that we have said his name on like 5 of the last 6 shows. And this happens to us every year where we do okay, you pick a player, now I'll pick a player. And we keep picking the same player back and forth. Talk to us about Ricky Pearsall here.
Yeah, I actually went to see like the first time this offseason that we talked about Ricky Pearsall, because I know he's been just a steady guy that we have talked about. It was the first show we did after the Super Bowl when we were talking about dynasty buys. And since then, at that time that we recorded that show, he was the wide receiver 40 in dynasty. He's now the wide receiver 33 in dynasty. So look at us, Alfredo, thought leaders, way ahead of the market here. People are starting to warm up to Ricky Pearsall. And of course, Deebo Samuel got traded. I think that's a big piece of news that probably adjusted that a little bit. But this is just an easy one, man. First round pick, missed all the preseason, missed the first 6 weeks of the season, slow ramp up. But what we saw over the final 2 weeks of the regular season were 18 targets. He had 14 receptions, 210 yards, and 2 touchdowns. They were using him as a receiver, as a rusher, even had some pass attempts sprinkled in there. He was just a big play machine. And now with Brandon Ayuk recovering from the ACL tear, Deebo Samuel out of the picture, Christian McCaffrey, I don't know, we're getting good reports, but we got to remember last year, like the day before the season kicked off, like, yeah, Christian McCaffrey's fine, and then didn't play for the next 11 weeks. So I'm not trusting a word that comes out of Kyle Shanahan's mouth. And it's just as simple as Pearsall probably being the wide receiver 1 to start the season alongside Juwan Jennings. And of course, Kittle is the real wide receiver 1 here. I don't want to bury the lead. I think he's the guy that's going to draw the majority of the targets. Love him. I've got him ranked as my tight end 1 overall this year. But Ricky Pearsall is a really fun wide receiver. We saw him develop a good chemistry with Brock Purdy. And I talk about it all the time, man. But you go back and you watch that game against Detroit, 12 touches, 147 yards, a touchdown, a pass attempt. That was where we were seeing the very creative usage. First touch of the game was a jet sweep where he hurdles over a guy. Then he gets a contested target in the end zone, deep downfield, across the middle, in the screen game. I mean, they were just doing whatever they could to get the ball in Ricky Pearsall's hands. He is just such a fun player. And the path is set for him to be the wide receiver 1 on what should be a good offense.
Yeah, man, I'm all aboard the Ricky Pearsall train, and this is going to be one of those guys that, like, we call Jaylen Waddle an auto draft in the 6th round. To me, Ricky Pearsall is an auto draft in the 8th round. And anytime that you can go and get a guy who, I mean, whether it's Pearsall, Waddle, some of these other guys that we're saying here, when you can draft a player that has the opportunity to lead the wide receiver group on their team in targets in the 6th, 7th, 8th round, it's you have to do it. Like, you have to be willing to take these swings on these guys, and because this is where you do when you draft. And we know that with wide receivers, it's volume. It's volume that ends up being king here, and we saw that in those final 2 games. I know a lot of commenters got like their panties in a bunch last time, saying, "Dave, no, he didn't become a wide receiver 1." We were simply saying he did it in the final 2 games of the season last year, where he looked great. He looked fantastic, and a lot of that was volume. So volume is the thing that wide receivers need.
You know, one guy that we're not talking about today because he's getting way too steamed up is Ladd McConkey. But you know, I'm just starting now to like plug into these best ball drafts, and there are just some values that I can't wrap my head around. And like Ladd McConkey in the middle to end of the 2nd round is an auto pick for me. Jaylen Waddle, where he's sitting, auto pick for me. Ricky Pearsall, auto pick for me. And then the round before I take Ricky Pearsall, the guy that you're going to talk about next, is another guy. Like I'm doing all of these different drafts, and I know people are like, "Oh, you should diversify in case you're wrong." And I'm just like, well, I can't diversify when I'm seeing like, yeah, I can sit there in round 6, 7, and 8 and walk away with Jaylen Waddle, Chris Olave, sorry to spoil it, Alfredo, and then Ricky Pearsall. But like just walking out with those 3 receivers in the middle rounds, those are 3 guys that easily have finishing as a top 10 receiver in their range of outcomes and are just so cheap in drafts right now. So
Well,
Alfredo, who are you talking about next?
since you did the spoiler there, yeah, it's Chris Olave, man. Chris Olave, he's my wide receiver 30. Dave, he's your wide receiver 26. You are Willie Nelson on Chris Olave, man.
And let's not forget that I was like the anti Chris Olave
guy
all
I
last
know.
offseason. I see this like we don't hate players. We don't even like players, but we
dislike their costs.
We dislike values, right? And now, like this is a guy who perennially we were drafting in round 2. Now he's fallen in round 7. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, like I don't get it. Him at wide receiver 35. He's on that round 6, 7 turn here, Dave, like you just mentioned. And it's, to me, this is going to sound so much like a trust me bro analysis here. He's just a good wide receiver. And that's where things get like almost frustrating. Some of these players we're talking about are just simply good NFL wide receivers. And now their value matches the opportunity that they're being given. And you look back to last season, Dave, I'm going to throw some numbers at you guys here. 10th in first downs per route run amongst wide receivers with 500 plus routes since 2022. That comes from our boy Matt Harmon over at Yahoo Sports. And that first down per route run is one of those very, very predictive stats of fantasy success. Ryan Heath over at Fantasy Points. That's right. I'm crediting everyone today for this because there are so many people aboard the Chris Olave train that are simply saying, if things go right, if things even go decent, Chris Olave is a good fantasy wide receiver. Now, the tough part, I know a lot of people are saying, well, can you promise me he's not going to get a concussion? I can't. I simply can't. I also simply can't promise you that any player won't get injured. That's just the truth about fantasy football here. What I can say is that there's no longer Derek Carr on this team throwing hospital balls to Chris Olave. Now, they do have Tyler Shuck. We'll see what that ends up being. There's a little bit more Jameis there to Tyler Shuck's game, and we saw how good Chris Olave could be with Jameis Winston. And now when I look at this team and the way that they're set up, they bring back Brandon Cooks. They could actually be moving Chris Olave to the slot, which is exactly what Kellen Moore did last year with Devontae Smith in Philly, where, I mean, Chris Olave has had a higher yards per route run from the slot than he has out wide in his career. You look at the other guys that Kellen Moore has put in the slot, Keenan Allen, CeeDee Lamb, Devontae Smith. All of a sudden, Devontae Smith ends up having his best fantasy points per game of his career last year put in the slot. The volume wasn't quite the same, but he ended up having the most efficient year of his career. And that's something that we could see for Chris Olave here, where putting him in the slot, getting easy targets to him instead of doing what they've been doing in the past, which is run downfield, we're going to chuck it and see if you can come down with it. The volume out of the slot here can actually cover up a lot of QB problems. We've seen that with guys like Malik Neighbors finishes top 10. Garrett Wilson finishes top 12. Jerry Jeudy finishes top 15. Jakobi Meyers finishes top 24. All these guys end up finishing as high-end fantasy wide receivers based on volume. Now, if that can happen for Chris Olave, you're getting yourself a great pick here in the 7th round as a wide receiver. What was it, Dave, again? Like wide receiver 35? Yeah, that's just crazy to me. So I love the value that you're getting here. And yeah, I think that even with a rookie like Tyler Shuck here, as long as Kellen Moore is calling the plays, I think we're going to get Chris Olave in a better situation.
Yeah, and a lot of sharp people are on Chris Olave, and a lot of not sharp people are scared about the concussions and the quarterback room. And I think it's just as simple as like we see all the time that good receivers are able to overcome bad situations. And I think him getting pushed from being a round 2 pick last year to a round 6 or 7 pick this year is just a huge overcorrection. I mean, this is a young, talented receiver, and of course, there's concerns about the quarterback room in New Orleans, but the volume's going to be there. This is just an easy pick. You're going to get no pushback from me on this one whatsoever.
Well, Dave, no pushback from you, no pushback from me, but there's something that I want to push back on. And that's people who have not taken advantage of the Football Guys summer sale that we've got going on right now. You like how I did that? They said, don't make it obvious, don't make it weird. I made it a little bit weird, but a little less obvious. And so summer sale, guys, we got a 10% off sale right now for the first year on any premium subscription. And if you're familiar with Football Guys, or even if you're not, you know. Okay, what we have all the tools you need for before the season, the draft dominator, the league dominator, cheat sheets, real-time rankings, everything that you're going to need going into your draft. But then you get into the season and we've got all the expert tools that you need: waiver wire, start sit, trade tools, injury updates, access to hundreds of articles. You've got our show. There's so many things in the Football Guys website that you can enjoy as a premium subscriber. And also, if fantasy is your thing, but then you have even more, you want IDP, you want DFS, you want best ball, there's so many other things we can customize everything that you're looking at, every ranking, every single piece of content to whatever it is you are playing. And we've got this sale going on right now from June 30th to July 7th. So make sure you click the link in the description of this video or in the pinned comment. And then, of course, on the podcast, we'll make sure that link as well is in the description of the show. We are now down to, what is this? This is the final 4 wide receivers we've got here. And this is where we're starting to reach a little bit deeper into our bag. And I really like this guy you're talking about here because another auto pick for me, Demario Douglas, the New England Patriots.
Yeah, and the title of the show is wide receivers no one is talking about, and I think some of the guys that
Nobody.
we talked about earlier in the show, people are talking about. So I wanted to really kind of
So we lied.
stretch my imagination here and get like deep, deep, deep down the list. And Demario Douglas, I've got him as my wide receiver 45. ADP is wide receiver 73. And this one for me, it's kind of like a game theory thing more than anything else. Like, we look at it, Drake May had a good rookie season, and people are excited about him for year 2. But there is this huge dissonance between the quarterback outlook and the wide receiver outlook. Stephon Diggs right now is the first Patriots receiver being drafted. He's going as wide receiver 42 overall in round 8. Kyle Williams is next. He's going as wide receiver 61 in round 12. Kyle Williams, we got to remember, round 3 wide receiver who, I hate to say it, but hasn't been getting a lot of buzz so far out of camp. And this is the guy that we're taking as a wide receiver 2. Demario Douglas is next on the list, getting drafted as a wide receiver 3, going off the board in round 16. That is crazy to me. Our ADP, footballguys.com/ADP, goes 123 wide receivers deep. And those are the only wide receivers that qualify in the top 123. There's just this weird disconnect between how we feel about Drake May and how we feel about his receivers. But I want to bet on Demario Douglas because historically what we've seen in these Josh McDaniels offenses is that the slot role ends up being a very lucrative and high volume role. And last year, Demario Douglas, 379 snaps out of the slot. The next closest was Kayshon Boutte with 69. I mean, he was the full-time slot player last year. And he does have this kind of weird build where he's like somewhere in between a slot player and an outside receiver. And maybe we see something of a rotation on that inside receiver position. But I just look at some of the guys that we've seen playing the slot in Josh McDaniels' offense historically: Wes Welker, Julian Edelman, Eddie Royals, Jakobi Meyers. These guys were all peppered with targets. And I think that's going to be Demario Douglas's role. And last year was weird. Jacoby Brissett was starting early in the year. Drake May was just getting teed off on behind a bad offensive line. Well, they beefed up the offensive line this year. Now they've got Rabel in there, a coach that I have a lot more faith in than I had in Gerard Mayo. Josh McDaniels is back, a guy who's had a lot of success throughout his NFL career. And I just have faith that this offense gets back on track in 2025. And if we're excited about Drake May, we're excited about the additions to the offense. I don't understand why there isn't more buzz for Demario Douglas right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the hype is sort of being covered up by Stephon Diggs being there and people kind of waiting and seeing how does the injury play out. And then a lot of it is also just being covered up by you get your rookie running back, Trevion Henderson in there. People are excited about Drake May running the ball. And then everyone just kind of forgets like he's going to have to pass to somebody.
Mhm.
And we know what Hunter Henry is. The rookie fever kind of gets out of control. Like a lot of people getting excited about Kyle Williams. I think he's a fine prospect and all, but
Definitely not a
probably
slot player either. Like his best case scenario as a rookie is stretching the field and then maybe developing over time.
right.
But like he's definitely not taking that slot role. He's going to be, you're hoping he scores a big touchdown. He's not going to be getting 8 to 10 targets per game.
And that's it. That's it right there. So if we're looking at the guy who honestly could be leading this team in targets midway through the season or by the end of the season, yeah, it's Demario Douglas. And this I think is the lowest that you can draft a player that could lead its team in targets, and that's just crazy to me. Round 16 is nuts.
Yeah. And I think that there's just, I don't know, there are people still holding on to hope for Javon Baker and Jalen Polk from last
No,
year. And I know there's this drumbeat about Efton Kism because he looks like Wes Welker
just
and
say it.
and Julian Edelman. Yeah, I mean
He's a
that's
white
what it is.
slot.
He is, and I think that's what people get excited about. But at the end of the day, like they found their slot receiver last year. It was Demario Douglas, played almost all of his snaps out of the slot. He can move out wide when they need him to be as well. And Stephon Diggs, it looks like he's probably starting the season on pup. Going into his age 32 year, coming off of an ACL. I don't think he's a bad pick by any means if he's still got something left in the tank. But there's also a world where Stephon Diggs just can't return from this injury and his career is over. And by necessity, Demario Douglas is just forced to be the wide receiver one.
And by the way, this is not something where we're saying like, hey guys, where Demario Douglas is, you need to be locked into drafting him no matter what. Especially with us doing a show here on July 1st, this is telling you be aware of where these players are going so that you're tracking this. And if the ADP is anywhere similar to where it is now by the time you get into your drafts and nothing has really changed on that New England Patriots offensive front, this is a screaming value where he is right here.
Yep.
All right, next player, Jakobi Meyers, Las Vegas Raiders. I've got us on wide receiver 33. Dave, you're at wide receiver 35. Consensus ADP has him at wide receiver 41, and I don't get it. Round 8 for Jakobi Meyers, a guy who, I mean, wide receiver 23 in PPR points per game last season from week 8 on after Devontae Adams was traded. He was wide receiver 19 in PPR points per game. So you're telling me that I can go and get a guy who can essentially be a top 20 wide receiver, draft him as outside of the top 40, get him in round 8 as potentially my wide receiver 5, my wide receiver 4, like whatever we're looking at here. This is a player who not only thrives on volume, but finally found the efficiency and the ability to score that he had been searching for years and years and years in that New England Patriots offense. Like it was almost becoming a joke that he couldn't score touchdowns. And then, I mean, Dave, the expected fantasy points per game from him last year, 17th amongst wide receivers. Now you have an offense that should be more efficient. You have a quarterback who is better. You have an offensive coordinator who should be better. And I mean, I know a lot of people are going to say, yeah, they're going to establish the run. To me, that just shows more scoring opportunity and an offense that's going to be better. Defenses are going to have to focus on Ashton Ginty. They're going to have to focus on Brock Bowers and look at who's going to be soaking up all the targets. It's going to be Jakobi Meyers. And so I love this for him. The pass attempts should stay high, just like how they were last year in Las Vegas. Geno Smith passed the ball a ton last year in Seattle. He's another guy that I think is going pretty underlooked, even at the quarterback spot. So I'm actually weirdly excited about the Raiders. I think they could have a good offense and a pretty poor defense, and one of these teams where you're just like, you know what, I will invest in players on this team.
Yeah, Myers is another one that I'm a little bit ahead of consensus on. A pretty easy pick. Just when you start looking at where the touches are going to go, Myers is clearly going to get his in this offense. And you talk about it being more of a run-heavy team for sure. I think that's going to happen with Ashton Ginty. But we have to remember that if you look back at these Pete Carroll offenses and these Chip Kelly offenses, they have very similar offensive philosophies. And what they do is they use the run to set up the pass. I mean, the entire offense is predicated around this read option out of the shotgun. So what they're going to do is run, 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 run. As soon as the defense starts to pull up, then you can hit Myers on the deep shot behind the defense. So he's going to have a lot of volume. And like you said, the efficiency is ticking up. We just expect this to be a better all around offense with Geno Smith now. This is another easy click that you're not going to get any pushback from me on.
That's why we talk about these guys, the undervalued guys that not enough people are clicking on in drafts. And well, all of our listeners should be. What's going on outside your window, man? I heard a horn. Was there like a big
Yeah,
18-wheeler delivery or something?
I am
train?
expecting a dumpster roll-off delivery today, and they said it would come in sometime this afternoon. So I heard a horn and I heard some engine brakes and thought that might have been it, but was not. Yeah, we're doing a got an old couch to get rid of, and I've got
Okay, I'm like,
some
why are
lawn
you expecting a
scraping,
dumpster?
and we're doing some decluttering around the house. So yeah, sometime today, maybe during this show, I'm getting a dumpster delivered to our driveway. Sorry.
Fun old people conversation. Definitely was
Mhm.
not on my bingo card to talk about
Yeah.
dumpsters.
My wife and I,
Uh,
yeah, what are we doing for this lovely 4th of July weekend? Let's do a deep clean of the house and some landscaping.
it's so gross. It's absolutely gross. Well, I can't say speaking of gross or speaking of dumpsters because, well, you know what? We're dumpster diving. We're going really, really late into the ADP here. And this is a guy who is being drafted as the wide receiver 100.
Meaning he's not being
Undrafted.
drafted.
Exactly. He is not being drafted. And honestly, even at where we have him ranked, he's probably not getting drafted, but he's going to be one of these players that you can look at as a final pick in your drafts or as a waiver wire pickup right before week 1. Dave, talk to us about the deepest dive on this one. Jordan Whittington from the Los Angeles Rams.
Alfredo, I don't know if you know, but no one is talking about these wide
No
receivers.
one.
You're going to find nobody talking about Jordan Whittington this offseason. And I don't think he's somebody that you need to draft, but somebody that I want to talk about because I think he's a very misunderstood player. 18 targets in weeks 8 and 5 last year, and pretty much nothing for the rest of the season. Actually, 6 targets over the remainder of the season. After we saw this week 4 and 5, we said, like, oh, Jordan Whittington has arrived. And no, it was kind of a flash in the pan. But there's just so much context missing there. One, Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua were both injured in weeks 4 and 5. And what we saw is Jordan Whittington step into this role where he was playing over 90% of the snaps, averaging 9 targets per game. He essentially stepped in as the full-time wide receiver. And what we have seen in these Sean McVay offenses is that he wants to get his guys in motion. He wants to kind of set them up on these pick plays where he can get them open, where they can catch the ball while they're moving. And we've seen this from Cooper Kupp. We've seen it from Robert Woods. We've seen it now most recently from Puka Nacua. And Jordan Whittington was kind of playing this Puka Nacua-ish role. And I hate to say that, but you go back and watch the game. They're putting in motion. They were lining him up as an H-back, drags across the middle of the field. He was running this 31-yard reception out of the backfield where he was lined up as a wide or as a running back. He ran a sluggo route. I mean, they were doing everything they could to get this creative usage to get the ball in his hands. And then unfortunately, he got hurt in week 5. And by the time that he came back, he was dinged up. And by the time he did return, Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp were healthy. And for the rest of the season, he was like a 10% snap share player. So it's a really weird situation because we always talk about handcuff running backs and how valuable those are and that you want to spend your late round picks on these handcuff running backs. We don't typically see handcuff wide receivers. What we see if a receiver goes down is that the targets are just kind of distributed around anybody else remaining. But I think Jordan Whittington is a handcuff wide receiver for Puka Nacua, as crazy as that sounds. And Puka Nacua is a guy that we've seen over his NFL career does struggle to stay healthy. So there's no projectable volume here. I think if everybody's healthy, he's going to be like a 10 to 15% snap share sort of player. But you can get him round 20 in your best ball drafts. You can get him in the final round of your deep redraft leagues. You can get him almost for free in dynasty startups. You can probably get him on your waiver wire right now. And I think that we should look at him in a similar light to how we look at, Blake Corum and Trey Benson and these injury away running backs. He is an injury away wide receiver. I don't think he's ever going to be, 20 targets per game like Puka Nacua can pull, but he's a guy who, if Nacua goes down, we can look at Jordan Whittington as a guy that you're plugging in as a viable weekly wide receiver too. So just a guy I wanted to talk about, a very, very deep pull here, but somebody that I'm going to be keeping a close eye on in training camp.
There's sort of a Jawan Jennings
Yeah.
ish thing going on there with Jordan Whittington. And no one was drafting Jawan Jennings last year. If you
Mhm.
were, kudos. But I mean, it was all of a sudden when one player went down on the Niners, you were like, okay, well, who's the next guy? And then when you had multiple players down, you're like, all right, well, this is the guy, and he's carrying my fantasy team each week. I'm not suggesting that these Rams receivers are going to get hurt, but
But
we also, I mean, it happens. Like it does. It just happens with these players. We've seen it happen with Puka Nacua, and I mean, I'm sure there's gonna be that episode where everyone is talking about, okay, these are the Rams wide receivers to go get: Tutu Atwell or Jordan Whittington. Go, and it's just like if you kind of know ahead of time, you know to have these guys as a priority. If you have a deep bench, if you have IR spots and you can move injured players around, stash one of these guys early in the season or even right after a draft, this works out for you. So yeah, this is one of these savvy things I think you do when you're playing in your league on expert mode.
And I think that Tutu Atwell and Jordan Whittington is the perfect conversation for the difference between projections and rankings. Because projection wise, Tutu Atwell absolutely projects better. He's going to be the wide receiver 3 on the team. His role isn't really going to change, but the contingent upside for Jordan Whittington gives him a ceiling that Tutu Atwell could never achieve. Because if Puka Nacua gets hurt, Tutu Atwell's role isn't going to change. They're not going to start asking Tutu Atwell to run these short crosses across the middle of the field where he's getting lit up by linebackers. He'd be dead after half a game. Like, he can't do that. Jordan Whittington, however, you got to remember in high school, this guy was a running back. In college, he played this kind of hybrid running back wide receiver role as well. So he is made to play in the Sean McVay offense, to be that after the catch guy. Like I said, the Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, Jordan Whittington is cut from that same cloth. So that's what I like about him. And again, we're not trying to predict injuries here by any means, but man, Puka Nacua has just been in the league for 2 years now. A concussion, a chest slash rib strain that he had to deal with. He had the shoulder AC joint injury. He had a tear in his knee. He had the PCL sprain. He had that bursa sac knee injury. I mean, this guy has a pretty lengthy injury history for only being in the league for 2 years. We can't predict injuries by any means, but if he has to miss a handful of games, I'd rather get Jordan Whittington for free at the end of my draft than be the guy dropping 80% of my fab to get him after Puka Nacua gets hurt.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this is playing your league on expert mode, but you're the only one that's actually being the expert. I think that analogy doesn't work well. Everyone else is playing on expert. You're playing on easy. There we go.
Yeah.
Did it. Did it. There it is. All right, Dave, final player on here. And this is actually the only one that you and I kind of disagree with. And you told me, I'm excited to hear your stance on this player, what you find. And that's what I'm going to do here today. Is my job is to try to convince you that Jayden Reed, wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers, is a value where he's going as wide receiver 45 in round 8. I've got him ranked as wide receiver 39. You've got him ranked as wide receiver 52. So I am, 6 spots ahead of consensus ADP, and you're 7 spots lower. So we've got a 13 spot difference in terms of wide receiver rankings. So I'm going to tell this story here, Dave. Let's see if I can get you to shift even just a little bit on this, okay? And obviously, guys, let us know down in the comments where you're at with Jayden Reed, what you think here, because I understand there was a lot of inconsistencies last year. So last season, Jayden Reed, first in design targets amongst all wide receivers at 31.9%. And a lot of people like to use that as a negative. It's, well, he can't get open, so they've got to create design targets. No, teams love to get the ball in the hands of their best players. You go back and look at 2023, it's Jackson Smith and Jigba, it's Zay Flowers, it's Rashee Rice. In 2022, it's Deebo Samuel and Cooper Kupp. No one is saying that any of those guys can't get open. We're saying, yeah, they get volume, and volume wins games. Well, we can say the same for Jayden Reed. And now them being able to do this here in Green Bay led to Jayden Reed having the lowest percentage of targets coming against cornerbacks. What they were doing is setting him up to get these highly schemed touches. Okay. He was first. Let me phrase this correctly. The lowest percentage of targets coming against quarterbacks, he was first in the league against that, just 44%, actually coming against guys who are equally as fast as him and able to cover a bit better. Other guys who are similar to this, Khalil Shakir, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and JSN. So once again, he's in good company of guys that are able to get easy targets, and they scheme him open in space against slower defenders. This is something the Packers have done for both of the seasons that Jayden Reed has been in the league. He's been 14th in fantasy points per route run last year, and in 2023, he was 7th. So this is a guy that when he's on the field, which I know doesn't happen as often as it should, but when he's on the field, he is incredibly efficient. He's scoring touchdowns, he's earning targets, and he's getting yards after catch. The touchdowns haven't been fluky for him either. 8 touchdowns in 2023, 6 touchdowns last year. The big issue here was the amount of passing volume that actually happened in that Packers offense. And that's not something that I expect to occur again. Jordan Love got injured in week 1 last year. Then he gets re-injured later in the season. And so the Packers ended up with the 3rd lowest percentage of passing plays and the third lowest number of pass attempts in the league, a huge drop from being in the middle of the field where they were 19th in 2023 when Love was healthy. Now they draft Matthew Golden. The first time they've drafted a wide receiver in forever shows they're going to have a commitment to passing the ball more. Golden is a strictly outside wide receiver, ran roughly 70% of his routes outside. He may move around the lineup a little bit. He's probably going to be the guy that's coming in motion a bunch, but who this really affects more so is going to be Romeo Doubs and Dontavian Wicks. Jayden Reed's role as the slot guy and the design target guy inside is going to be set. We saw him 9 games as a top 36 wide receiver, so that's a wide receiver 3 or better. 3 games as a top 12 wide receiver, so we know there's upside there. To me, Jayden Reed is a wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside that you're able to draft as a wide receiver 4. This guy to me is a value on a Packers offense that I think should be better and able to pass the ball more with a healthy Jordan Love.
I get what you're saying. I just you talk about,
It's
I
like
just
talking
see
to my wife.
I just see that
I really felt
Jayden
like I was
Reed,
dropping bars, and you're like, well, let me tell you why you're wrong.
I mean, even the design touches for me, like that doesn't get me going. I think Debo Samuel, you talk about that, and like we saw what happened when those design touches stopped happening for Debo Samuel.
He
He
got hurt.
kind of fell off a cliff. And the big thing that jumps out to me, our friend Rich Rebar shared this a while ago. Jayden Reed on when the Packers had 1 or 2 wide receivers on the field, Jayden Reed ran 7 routes last year. Like he
Yeah.
just cannot get on the field for 2 wide receiver sets. And now, I mean, Romeo Dubs has some shortcomings as a receiver for sure, but he does the blocking and he is a contested catch guy. He can move the chains. He is the X receiver. And I don't think there's anything Jayden Reed can do to take that role from him because they're such different
No.
players. And then you look at Christian Watson, or I mean, I'm sorry, not Christian Watson. Christian Watson now out of the picture. So Matthew Golden steps into that role. I think that we're still going to look at the same issue here, which is that Jayden Reed is only going to be on the field for 3 wide receiver sets. The good news is that the Packers do run a lot of 3 wide receiver sets, but I don't see a world where that role changes. And in best ball, I like it because Jayden Reed has the athleticism. He's got the big play upside and he could have those boom weeks, but the non-boom weeks are a pretty big liability, and he has quite a lot of those. With his ADP falling a little bit, I don't think that it's going to completely crush you. You're not spending a 3rd round pick on Jayden Reed like you were last year, so you can live with that volatility a little bit better when he's your wide receiver 3 or your flex player. But I still think that he's just stuck in this kind of slot-centric role where Dubs is going to be the X. We're going to have Matthew Golden now taking over the Christian Watson role, and we're only going to see Jayden Reed out there on 3 wide receiver sets. That's my fear, which is the same fear I had about Jayden Reed last year.
See, like all that did was cement it more for me because Matthew Golden's going to be in the Christian Watson role. We saw who still gets the targets when Christian Watson's out there. It's Jayden Reed. And I know this, I know that he's not always out there in 2 wide receiver sets. That could obviously change this upcoming year because we don't know how Matthew Golden is going to fare as well as a rookie, but also this team is planning on passing the ball more. That's something that they've talked about. And last year, everything got kind of changed when Jordan Love got hurt and then got re-injured. And they're like, okay, well, we're going to have to commit to 2 tight end sets. Let's run the ball a lot more with Josh Jacobs than we intended to. And it was more of a, let's slow the game down. Let's not pass the ball as much. And let's allow our defense to try to make some victories for us. Now that defense is a lot worse. The secondary is a lot worse. I think they're going to have to pass to stay in a lot of these games, especially against some of these high octane teams. They have like the Bears offense is better. The Lions offense remains good. The Vikings offense remains good. If the Packers want to stay competitive in their division, they're going to have to pass the ball and be able to keep up with them. So I think we could just kind of stick. I think he's at a good ADP. Like, I'm not saying that, man, we need to be drafting him in round 6. I think round 8 is great where you can get a guy who's going to give you some wide receiver 2 weeks. I don't know if there's a lot of guys in that range that I think are going to give you that same value.
Yeah, I mean, I think he can give you wide receiver 1 weeks. Like we saw the ceiling last year, sky high. Like he can go for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. The thing, it's just that a lot of these other guys that are slot-centric players, when we look at, Cooper Kupp from a few years ago, or Jackson Smith-Njigba in his role now, or Demario Douglas, who I talked about earlier, the nice thing is that when the team switches to a 2 wide receiver sets, those guys have the elasticity where they can move and play out wide, and we haven't seen that from Jayden Reed yet. So my fear is that when they're in these 2 wide receiver sets, Jayden Reed is just watching from the outside, and when you're sitting on the bench, you can't score fantasy points. So, I mean, maybe there's a world where Jayden Reed can overtake take Matthew Golden and kind of be that field stretching role in 2 wide receiver sets, but it's just something that now through 2 years in his NFL career, we have not seen yet. And my fear is that it's going to be Romeo Dubs and Matthew Golden out there in 2 wide receiver sets, and Jayden Reed still just coming in when they have to go in a 3 wide receiver set. And especially in games where they do have a lead, which isn't going to be all the time, but when they do have a lead, then they're playing almost no 3 wide receiver sets and they're running the ball a lot. And those are the bust games from Jayden Reed that really end up hurting you. In best ball, doesn't matter, but in managed leagues, Jayden Reed can, the volatility gets tough on a week to week basis.
I'm looking around at his ADP here, Dave, and let's play a little this or that here because I'm seeing guys. Deebo Samuel's going as wide receiver 39.
No, I'm so low on Deebo Samuel. Yeah,
Okay.
that's not a question for me.
Khalil Shakir or Jayden Reed?
Let me pull up my rankings right now. Yeah, I got
Say it
Khalil
with your
Shakir.
heart.
Khalil
Okay.
Shakir.
Stephon Diggs or Jayden Reed?
Oh, Stephon Diggs. I've got like 4 spots ahead.
Cooper Kupp or Jayden Reed?
Cooper Kupp.
You're going Cooper Kupp? Okay. All right.
Cooper Kupp is my wide receiver 44, and Jayden Reed is my wide receiver 52. So for me, and again, I just wrote an article, kind of lumping these guys into tiers, and Jayden Reed falls into the what I call the tough clicks tier, which is Brandon
Yeah.
Ayuk, Jayden Reed, Deebo Samuel, and Christian Kirk. All 4 of those guys are being valued pretty similarly. And they're guys that I just find myself passing. I like the receivers going ahead of them. I like the receivers going after them. And when I'm at that point in the draft, I typically find myself preferring a lot of the running backs or even dipping into the quarterback and tight end well there instead.
See, I put him closer to that. So I listed Deebo Samuel and Khalil Shakir. They're at wide receiver 39 and wide receiver 40 in ADP. And that's where I have Jayden Reed a bit more because it's similar roles running out of the slot. You're going to get some of the gadgety stuff out of the backfield with some carries, not always on the field, but there's still that high upside for a guy that can hit you with the deep play. That Jayden Reed did do that last year quite a bit and still give you the touchdown upside. So
Yeah,
that's
just
more or
just
less
to
where I see him.
put some names to it. These are the guys I have directly ahead of Jayden Reed in my
Yeah.
rankings. Matthew Golden, funny enough, who we just talked about quite a bit. I prefer Matthew
Ooh,
Golden over
okay.
Jayden Reed.
I don't.
Emeka Egbuka, and then Jawan Jennings, Michael Pittman, Stephon Diggs, Demario Douglas, Cooper Kupp, Darnell Mooney, Khalil Shakir. Those are all guys that I'm taking before Jayden Reed. But if he's on the board after those
Interesting.
guys are gone, I have no problem taking him at cost.
So Mecca Buka, we won't tail off too long here. Is that a guy? Because I see him being the guy that comes off the field in 2 wide receiver sets there in Tampa, which doesn't happen as often. But when you flip the script like that, why have a guy like Igbuka, a rookie, ahead of Jayden Reed, who we've seen the production from?
I think Igbuka is a better player. Also, we're getting reports
Okay.
that Chris Godwin might not be ready for Week 1. I think we're already seeing, once we start to see signs of an aging wide receiver declining, it's typically not a graceful walk down the age cliff. It's typically a fall headfirst on the age cliff, and I think Mike Evans is knocking on that door. And also, weirdly enough, I was kind of surprised by this because I definitely had Igbuka pegged as like a pure slot player, but we got some quotes from Baker Mayfield that he is already able to play
Oh, he's playing
every
outside.
single position.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of the hope there is that one, he can start the season in the slot role if Chris Godwin is to miss time, and then whether it be a Mike Evans injury or a Chris Godwin injury, whatever, there's huge contingent upside there. But I think Igbuka has a little bit more versatility, even as a rookie, than we've seen from Jayden Reed through his first couple of years.
This is such a weird tangent for us to do. But I'm slightly worried about Jalen McMillan over there in Tampa. Like
Oh
I
my
think he's
goodness.
actually still going to keep getting some work, and that Tampa receiver room is going to get a little weird.
Yeah,
But
let me see.
Dave,
Again, I just did my comparing players to consensus. Jalen
uh,
McMillan is my wide receiver 83. I am 20 spots below consensus
oh wow,
on Jalen McMillan.
yeah, you are.
Just a guy that, yeah, I mean, we saw it last year. Like when everybody was hurt, he was kind of pushed into a full time role, and I think they said, okay, well now we've got a Emeka Egbuka, so we don't need to do that again.
Look at that. We always do it, baby. We always do it. We underpromise, we overdeliver. You're welcome, America. We told you that we would talk about 8 players. We talked about more. And this was a fun show. I like this. We're getting to look at guys early that aren't getting the value that they should be. And if they're still here come time for your fantasy drafts, you're going to be looking so good and have the best roster coming out of that and ready for week 1. As always, I want to thank everybody for watching or listening all the way through. Myself and Dave are going to be back again next week as we have shows coming out every Tuesday for you guys. And I just want to thank everybody once again for watching and listening. We'll see you next time. Adios.